What single human has done the most damage to the progression of humanity in the history of mankind? Guidy Chorliak. He was a surgeon in the 1300s who vehemently spoke out against another fellow surgeon, Theodoric Borgognoni. Theodoric was a surgeon who wrote about his theories on proper wound care and believed that the best thing you can do to a wound is wrap it and keep it clean. Guy hated what Theodoric was writing because it directly went against the teachings of Galen, an ancient Greek surgeon who believed pus was the body's way of balancing your humors. Guy's teachings were widely accepted, and it's believed that his ignorance set the development of antisepsis in surgery back about 600 years. Guidy Chorliak was born in the 1300s, not 1200s, as he was alive during the Black Death. Ignaz Semmelweis was the guy who was thrown into a mental asylum for saying surgeons should wash their hands between seeing patients. If I remember correctly, there was also a French physician who discovered some valuable kinds of anesthetics, but was ignored by the medical community because he couldn't write in Latin. His name was Ambroise Parr. From Wikipedia, Parr discovered that the soldiers treated with the boiling oil were in agony, whereas the ones treated with the ointment had recovered because of the antiseptic properties of turpentine. This proved this method's efficacy, and he avoided cauterization thereafter. However, treatments such as this were not widely used until many years later. He published his first book, The Method of Curing Wounds Caused by Arquebus and Firearms, in 1545. Injured soldiers continued to be treated with boiling oil for many years because Parr's discovery was snubbed. Similarly, there is also Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis, who was eventually committed into a mental hospital because they didn't believe his surgical sanitation theories. Link. Thomas Midgley Jr. He played a major role in development of tetraethyllead leaded gasoline, which went into mass production throughout the 1920s. This invention meant that the blood lead content in developing children rose, causing numerous problems, including cognitive issues and physical growth. It was also noticed that the rise in blood lead content matched with violence in adolescence in multiple countries. Midgley is also accountable for the discovery of chlorofluorocarbon CFC, specifically 3, which, as many know, had a drastic impact on the ozone. As of October 2020, the ozone hole above Antarctica sits approximately 23 million square kilometers, 8.9 million miles. Although these two inventions seem insignificant compared to more drastic actions taken by other single humans, it's the widespread impacts that his inventions had and are still being felt today. Even though both leaded gasoline and CFCs have been banned, P's the last invention made by Midgley actually killed him. It was to help him maneuver and get out of bed with the use of ropes and pulleys due to him contracting polio, but he got stuck, and eventually his invention strangled himself. This reply doesn't quite fit the post, but I felt that he had a large impact on society during the 20th century. There's an awesome podcast called Behind the Bastards that is basically all about deconstructing the worst people in history. Would recommend it to anyone interested in this thread. Thomas Midgley Jr. in 1921. This guy that discovered that tetraethyl lead could be used as an anti-knocking fuel additive for cars. It satisfied the needs of oil companies at the time because it worked, was cheap, and was patentable for that purpose. But it was also incredibly toxic, and burning leaded gasoline was hugely pollutive eventually. After the creation of the EPA and an oil crisis in the mid-70s, leaded gas was banned in 1996, but the damage was done. Interestingly, the guy didn't even show up for the occasion when the first customer filled up their car with leaded gas because he was at home, sick with lead poisoning. OP is compiling a hit list for their time traveling journeys. I just want to talk with them. Give them the clamps. Oh, you think I should use these clamps that I use every day at any opportunity? You're a freaking genius. Yeah, idiot. Ho, ho. This guy's an ox. He's got oxen-like strength. Hey, he needs a nickname. Right. Let's call him Clamps. Purportedly, the unnamed inventor of flexible glass Vitrum Flexile brought a drinking bowl made of the material before Tiberius Caesar. The bowl was put through a test to break it, but it merely dented, rather than shattering. The inventor repaired the bowl easily with a small hammer. According to Petronius, After the inventor swore that he was the only man alive who knew the manufacturing technique, Tiberius had the man executed. He feared that the glass would devalue gold and silver, since the material might be more valuable. Link. What an idiot. TC had access to what he thought was worth more than gold and silver. So rather than claiming this new flexiglass material for his own benefit in the name of the empire, or whatever, he wipes it out of existence. Just because you're in charge doesn't mean you're smart. Robert Maxwell, father of Ghislaine. The man was the leading cause of paywalled scientific articles today. Before him, science publishing was relatively open. He helped shape the industry into the cancer on academia it is today. Edit quite the thing to wake up to. Thanks everyone. For those interested, I found an article that details the events pretty well. The too long didn't read version is that through use of PR marketing, exclusivity deals, and copyright law, Maxwell threw Pergamon Press turned scientific publishing from a relatively non-profit driven endeavor to a predatory industry that charged institutions out the nose for research they paid nothing for. Check out Alexandra and Seb. They definitely help many people who can't access scientific research. Video on Seb link. Article link. The Maxwells really are cunts. The Mongolians, army of Hilagu, when they destroyed Baghdad's libraries that contained many of the past knowledge that set back humanity years. I would suggest Andrew Wakefield. His work ileal lymphoid nodular hyperplasia, non-specific colitis, and pervasive developmental disorder in children has been directly responsible for the mistrust of vaccines, the decline of Western rates of vaccination, and basically telling everybody that there's a boogeyman underneath your bed. He is directly responsible for thousands and thousands of deaths. He's a scientist who made a mistake. Why are you blaming him? It's not that he made a mistake. He had purposely customized the outcomes to meet the hypothesis so that he could get rich selling safe vaccines and diagnostic kits. He poisoned the well that saved so many people just so he could get rich. I have no idea how he can sleep at night. He sleeps on a pile of money he made from the people who paid him to fake the studies, as well as in L. Macpherson's arms. Disgusting man. The Ottoman caliphs who banned the printing press from the Muslim world. That's exactly how you destroy a civilization. Wow. That's like erasing the potential of millions of minds. Who knows what may have come from someone becoming literate enough to explain their ideas back then. I'd be thinking this onto a screen from Titan right now. Even more sad when you think that back then the Middle East was the hub of science and medicine. Yongle, emperor of the Ming dynasty in China, ordered a fleet of Zhenghe, the greatest trading and exploration fleet of the time, to be burned during his reign in the early 1400s. This was the beginning of an era of isolation for Chinese kingdoms, which ultimately led to the collapse of Imperial China, and indirectly to the rise of the PRC. Additionally, the wealth of the world overall decreased as a result of reduced trade with China, and if China had continued exploring, it is possible that they, not Europeans, would have colonized North America instead of merely maybe discovering it then telling no one as they did in history. It may not be a significant alteration of human progress, but it's one of those events that sets the world in a definitively different direction. Edit didn't say the Chinese did discover America. Just that they might have, because it's been theorized that they did, and they had the technology. I mean, the Inuit and Siberians have been crossing the Bering Sea in leather kayaks for thousands of years. So the Chinese definitely could have done it too if they wandered up that far. I don't know much about the actual history of that theory, and most of my comments on that are from Wikipedia searches this morning and willingness to believe fun hidden history scenarios that are actually possible. Thanks for all the upvotes. As a caveat, it would have hugely changed naval history too. It would be accurate to say that Europeans and their methods of sailing enabled European-led globalization and colonization. The durability of their designs, relative speed and range were critical developments with a measurable impact on the world. But really, the Chinese had a totally different system which would have really worked just as well, if not better. European ships were relatively small and had canvas sails, while the great Chinese ships that Zhenghe used were massive, and used these kind of folding bamboo sails ingenious for their strength and manageability. They even had watertight compartments, something European ships didn't even consider using for centuries. Both parts of the world produced ships that could do what the other kind did, while looking extremely different. So as a maritime history buff, I'm totally fascinated by how things on the high seas would have looked had the Yongle Emperor not stifled Chinese naval expansion in the cradle. Edit book recommendations are anything by Brian Lavery and Robert Gardiner. If China had begun to colonize the New World around the mid to late 1400s, the Europeans wouldn't be prevented from doing the same from the West around the same time. European and Far Eastern civilization would compete in the Americas. Now that would have made some really cool Western cowboy movies. Sample titles could include Lone Ranger and the Battle of New Shanghai, Noodle, Westerns. Edit, it seems I might have done a small Reddit. Sheikh al-Islam. I heard of this guy after hearing someone on TV complain about how this man set the Islamic world back by centuries. In 1515, the age of the Ottoman Empire, a learned scholar of the kingdom issued a decree that forbid printing press and made using it punishable by death. Edit grammar. More context. Wiki. In the year 1515, Sheikh al-Islam of the Ulema learned scholars issued a fatwa that printing was haram forbidden. As a result, Ottoman Sultan Selim I issued a decree of a death penalty on anyone using the printing press. The fatwa has been attributed as one of the reasons for the stagnation of knowledge, invention and discovery in the Muslim world, at a time when Europe was in the midst of the Renaissance period. It seems that Sheikh al-Islam is a title though, not a name. It seems that Sheikh al-Islam is a title though, not a name. And we would have known for sure though, if there were any books about it. It was all part of the master plan. Emperor Gaozong of China. This is kind of an obscure story, so let me tell you the whole thing. It was the 12th century, when people talk about how China used to be the most technologically advanced part of the world. This is the period they're talking about. Some historians add they were on the brink of industrializing. Then Manchuria invaded and conquered northern China. The imperial court retreated to the south and declared Gaozong, the emperor's brother, as the new emperor. China's top general Yu Fei, who, according to some records, literally had patriotism tattooed on his back, though that might have been made up by someone who wanted to emphasize how unfair the rest of this story is, rallied the army and defeated the Manchus, and was raring to chase them out. But he gets orders from Gaozong to back down, because he'd rather negotiate. These negotiations end up signing away the north half of China. A few years later, the Manchus invade again. Yu Fei beats them again, and pushes all the way back to the old capital Kaifeng. Then he gets the order to retreat. He responds with a letter saying that he's got the Manchus on the ropes, and he can reconquer northern China in like a month. No, says the emperor, retreat immediately. Eventually, Yu Fei does retreat, but he delays long enough to evacuate the city first, making up some logistical issues as an excuse. At this point, you may be wondering why Gaozong was so reluctant to push an advantage. The answer is that his brother was still alive. The king of Manchuria liked to bring him out once in a while and make fun of him. If Yu Fei reconquered China, he might liberate the rightful emperor, and Gaozong would be out of a job. As such, Gaozong was actively trying to throw the war, and he interpreted Yu Fei's delay at the end of this war as meaning that he had reached the point of at least considering going rogue. So as soon as Yu Fei got back, he was arrested and promptly executed on treason on the ground of either he might have done something, presumably because the optics on the actual charge, almost winning a war we wanted to lose, were too bad. People realize that this is bull quickly enough, and there are protests. But Gaozong manages to pin everything on one of his advisors and placated the mob by executing him. So how does this affect the long-term progression of humanity? Well, as I said, China might have been on the brink of industrializing at the time, but didn't have access to enough coal. There are coal deposits in China, but they're all in the north. Second, the Manchus never really got their internal issues sorted out, and 70 years later, were easily conquered by the Mongols, who then recruited a bunch of disaffected Chinese siege engineers. This essentially removed the one weakness of horse archer hordes: they are not good at taking fortresses, and allowed them to wreck half the world. Had China been united at the time and had been ruled fairly recently by a guy who had, if you recall, been taken prisoner by invaders from the north? So you can bet the defenses would be fairly well maintained. They probably could not have done this. So had it not been for the malice of this one man, the Mongols would probably never have become the juggernaut they eventually did, and the Industrial Revolution might have happened about 500 years ahead of schedule. Thomas Midgley Jr. He invented tetraethyl lead, an anti-knock additive for gasoline. The entire planet is contaminated with lead from his brilliant idea. For a follow-up act, he created chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, which almost destroyed the ozone layer. That stupid fish that decided to leave water. It are bad history as far as the eye can see. The only thing humans really learn by studying their history is that humans do not learn from their history. How in the duck did you land that username? Bhaktiar Khilji, hands down. In 12th century there was the world's biggest university in India, named Nalanda, where intellectuals from all around the world used to study. Then Turks invaded India under Khilji. They killed almost all the intellectuals and destroyed the university, and they burnt the library. The library continued to burn for 3 months. This has to be by far the biggest loss to mankind in my opinion. Same as Sonny Ali. Songhay King, who couldn't read or write, and this inferiority complex led him to conquer and burn down Timbuktu and killing all scholars that didn't manage to escape. A leader with an inferiority complex destroying things. That's some wild history. Surely that wouldn't happen today. History is stuck on repeat. History may not repeat, but it sure as shit rhymes. Sir Mark Sykes. This man was the British element in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. For those of you not in the know, 100 years ago the Middle East was an area that did have some nations and some more tribal areas. So people were more divided by language and culture, some by religion. France and Britain decided to carve up the Middle East into easier to govern territories, but fumbled this task and instead divided the territories on the map over these religious and tribal lines. Not only has this been a main contributing cause of conflict in the Middle East, if you take two opposing or rival groups and then suddenly group them as one country, what do you expect? But said conflicts have then fueled further conflicts again and again. This has then been further used by Islamic extremists as a reason to hate the Western powers, as they were the ones who created this terrible agreement. Even Sykes himself accepted that the agreement's wording should be changed in order to give those countries autonomous rule. What is a little sad is he actually seemed to want to help these regions with the agreement, but just bumbled the whole thing, which has led to most of the issues the Middle East has to this day. Sykes didn't make the modern Middle East though. He just played a large part in creating the circumstances in which its current problems thrive. Imagine all of the advancement, education and collaboration that could have happened had the Middle East been allowed to flourish unhindered and without resentment. A lot of people don't seem to understand the question. It's not who did bad thing or who I hate more. It's who hindered the progress of humanity the most. People just don't want to understand. Edward Bernays. He created modern day PR, which set the blueprint on how to control the masses by deception. He was Sigmund Freud's nephew and basically applied his theories to marketing. Because of the butterfly effect, if Ugg hadn't hit Bog with that rock in 200,000, because we'd be a galaxy spanning utopian civilization by now.